So to kick off, can you please just introduce yourselves and yeah, give me a little bit of your background into rocketry and also how you started in rocketry? Like what sort of started that first interest?
Well, you better go first,
Okay.
because unfortunately you were there in the beginning.
Okay.
Unfortunately,
Well, yes, unfortunately, because there was a prior club
Yep.
before Queensland Rocketry
Yep.
Society. There was a club called the Queensland Rocketry Club. And I walked into a place called Hobby One
Yep.
and purchased
Yeah,
that rocket.
Yep.
And while I was in there, there was a little flyer on the bench, and it gave, interested in rocketry, please contact Paul Kleitchen and the mobile phone number. I contacted Paul, and he had already done one launch at a launch site at Waterford, and that was on the flat of a dairy farm there, and he was trying to get a group of people together. At that stage, there was no idea of forming a club, and there was just a group of people who launched rockets on a Sunday morning. Some of those traditions continue.
Yes.
And anyway, so after one or two launches, occasionally we would meet the odd person. A person by the name of Blake Nicklick came along to one launch. A new member came. His name was Simon Lebke. There were a couple of other people who came along at that stage, and we decided we would get together and form a club. There had been, prior to that, another club some 10 years previously in southeast Queensland, and it had just dissolved. Paul knew a little bit about that, and he wanted to get a rocketry club going based around the launch site at Waterford. He had a rotary wing licence, and he knew a little bit about these exotic things called NOTAMs, and he said he'd arrange public liability insurance for the club. At a later point in time, we eventually found out that Paul's NOTAM was one that he had raised to do crop dusting, and he thought he could fly rockets under that. And his public liability insurance, he would, if there was a claim, he would use his electrician's public liability insurance. This club rapidly fell apart after about 4 or 5 launches at Waterford, and we even had a television station turn up at one stage to attend one of our launches. But Paul decided he was going to dissolve the club. That was a unilateral decision by himself. He dissolved the entire club, and he said he would take his expenses out of whatever people had paid as far as membership goes, and we were left high and dry without a club. So subsequent to that, a group of us, 6 of us.
So just before we move on, can you maybe tell me about one of the launch, like a typical launch day? What sort of motors? What sort of rockets? How many people?
That was a big rocket.
Okay.
That was the highest flying rocket in the club. It flew on 2 stages. First stage took it to about 500 feet.
Wow.
And it then went to about 1,800 feet. Because it was on a dairy farm, we were quite concerned about it. This had a streamer recovery and would actually come back to Earth. It flew on a D12-0 and I think a D12-5 it might have been. 5 or 7, I forget, but it got to about 2,000 feet. We decided that we needed to be able to understand how high they got, because we had no concept of putting electronics in something this small. So we used basically a theodolite. We had basically set up a device, and you knew how far you were from the rocket launch point, and you measured its height at apogee, measured the angle at apogee, took the sine of that, and we had a set of tables, and we'd work out whether it went to 1,300 or 1,800 feet. So it was a maths intensive process. I had a young boy at that point in time who was in year 8, and I thought this was excellent for him to get him into. He had a particular maths focus, and it was ideal.
Right.
And we started a bit of a project of building rockets and calculating diameters and working out centre of gravity and centre of pressure, all those typical things that are required. And I thought that was wonderful. he eventually lost interest in rocketry and left me high and dry in the sport by myself.
Nice.
Where would you like to go?
Well, it's so I guess we're right at the point of forming QRS.
QRS was formed. It was the Queensland Rocketry Society was formed because we thought the word society was better than just club.
Yep.
And
an association wasn't available.
yeah, there was something. So we couldn't. There were certain things we couldn't do.
Yeah.
I think initially we had at our very first launch, we had probably about 13 or 14 people.
Okay.
A couple of other persons who weren't at our formative meeting
Yep.
turned up.
And what year was that?
2007. That would have been in May, maybe April 2007,
Okay.
our very first launch. Club was formed the 15th of March 2007.
Yep.
And we got together and sorted it out. We recontacted the farmer at the property at Waterford, and we had a loose committee. Our first president was a gentleman by the name of Peter Scott.
Yep.
Our treasurer was Ryan McDonald, and because I said I could type up minutes, I was made secretary.
Yep.
And everyone else was a committee member.
Do you remember who the rest of the club was at that stage? I assume someone like Blake and Peter.
Well, there was Blake. Peter wasn't there at that stage.
Yep.
Brian Dixon.
Yep.
was there. My son Sam was there. We had to submit, I think, at that stage, to the Department of Fair Trading, the 5 or 7 people that were in the actual club. And my son, because he was 13 years of age, couldn't be in that list. And I think we may have roped Peter into basically becoming there, even though he wasn't there, and probably at that point in time didn't have an interest in rocketry truly, but came along because his son asked him to.
Right. Yeah. That's great.
And
Cart. Was Cart there?
no, we met Cart quite some time afterwards, probably
Wasn't that much?
about 6 to 12 months after that. It would have been. We had done a couple of launches before that. We did we went back to.
He was associated with the previous club.
No.
Because he told me.
No.
He told me that.
I know we remember who was there. Who was in the previous club, but he may have been. He could have been in a previous club
with Paul Pleitchen, and he paid his membership fees, and then Paul Pleitchen dissolved the club a day or a week later.
Oh, right.
And
Well,
so,
yeah.
And Cart went around
To get his money. Oh, I
his
didn't know
money
that.
back, and Paul, because Cart was a big guy and he looked.
I remember. Yeah.
So he got his money back.
No,
That's good. Cart, I remember. He was a real character, and I had one of the other members come up to me and say about Cart. I've never seen anyone put a motor together with a hammer before.
Wayne Roberts did that too.
Yeah. But that was. I wasn't aware of that. I know that Simon Lebke got his money back. Everyone else who was in the club didn't get their monies back because Paul advised that he had cost, and he'd taken his costs out, and after there was cost, there was but cents left. So Paul's idea of a bank account was a blue ice cream tin where he would put all of his club memberships, launch fees, etc., would go into the ice cream tin, and he would take out expenses as required.
What were the membership costs back in those days?
It was about $10
and for a year.
For a year,
Okay.
yeah.
And then launch fees.
Launch fees were possibly about the same.
Okay.
So there was, and it was basically to most launch gear was privately owned.
Yep.
So I'm not really quite sure what we were paying launch fees for.
Yep. Insurance.
We didn't have insurance till later in the stage. One of the things that Paul Pleitchen said, he was happy to hand over all of the records to the club if we became incorporated.
Yep.
He probably said that because he didn't think we would be able to
Yep.
become incorporated. One of our early meetings, and we used to have meetings in the Brisbane Forest Park. Sorry, it might have been Daisy Hills Forest Park, and we just go up there and we'd all meet. That was a central location, and Ryan had come up from the Gold Coast, myself and Brian had come in from the the western suburbs. Peter Scott would come up, and Ari by this time
Yep.
had joined the fold.
Yep.
And we would sit down at a park bench and we'd work out who was going to do what. So we ended up with things such as Ryan took the logo and used the logo. Blake continued to work on the website. Blake
Yep.
had put together the website for Quaitchen,
Yep.
the Queensland Rocketry Club. So he simply migrated the entire site, because Blake owned that site.
Yeah, yeah.
And he also owned the name, and he then took that whole name over and took it over to Queensland Rocketry Society.
Sounds great.
He still retained ownership of the name.
Yep. And when did this young lad join the club?
In about December.
2007.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
At the end of the
6
year.
months later. So why don't you tell us a bit about your, I guess, background leading into joining QRS and how you got into rocketry, all those sort of questions.
I was in an RSL club on the north side for my wife's job, and it was pretty boring. So I was and they had a newspaper, Courier Mail, and it was a Saturday night. So I was reading through the newspaper, and towards the end there was this whole page article about QRS. I always knew it popped out in my head.
Wow.
And I just didn't know anyone was doing rocketry in Australia. And here they were, just down the road from where I lived, the next day. So went down there with a friend. The most obvious thing, of course, was Ari had that great big rocket.
One that never flew.
One that never flew.
Yeah.
It was on display in Movie. There were no big launch. There were lots of level 0 launches. There was no high powered launches in those days. The biggest launch was a G. And the thing I remember was Blake had some sort of Patriot missile replica, and it took over, went horizontal, and it headed off towards the hills. It just looked like a real
missile.
And crashed into the hill.
Was that the one that buried its nose cone into the ground, and when we pulled it out, all the paint remained on the inside of the crater?
Something like that.
Yeah.
I think I've seen some photos. Yeah. So what was your first rocket?
First, it was something like that. I can't remember what it was.
Okay.
The first real
Was
one.
it the red one?
Probably was. The first real one was what's that? That phenolic. You've got it downstairs.
I guess I have got a great rockets just there.
Yeah, there's a famous.
You had a CC Express.
Yeah, that was about the same time.
Yeah.
Flew on countless G motors.
Yeah.
Apples. Okay.
I mean,
An aerial, was it?
No, a smaller aerial. Callisto.
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 Yeah.
Okay. What sort of altitude would you get out of a Callisto on a G? And I said, this is still at Waterford, is it?
No. When I first went,
LA2A?
it was out where you still launched.
Okay.
We were in the new paddock. We were in Gittins, in John Gittins' paddock. We moved from Michael's already, I think, by the time. That was our first launch, I think, in that paddock when we came.
Yeah, where they now got the water treatment set up.
Yeah.
Okay.
And we had to go up the hill to pick up the trailer from.
Yeah.
What was his name?
Christoffel.
He was
Just round the corner.
No, it was up the hill. Yeah, and he was kicked out eventually when they progressed with the water treatment. And he was Ray Jackson.
Ray Jackson. Yeah. So we had that. Yeah. So by that time we had already had Ari had come along to a first launch. We had already submitted a proposal to CASA, and they told us that we couldn't launch at Waterford because we were too close to the Parkbridge ILS beacon, and all aircraft would be converging on that point. and we'd applied to get a 5,000 foot waiver there, and they said that we'll never get above 400 feet. Our first launch was only 400 feet.
Okay.
So we didn't
at Waterford.
at Waterford,
Okay.
yeah. So yeah, and once we got to, by the time we got to Christopher's paddock, we were making application with CASA to try and get to 5,000 feet. We got it relatively quick, 6 weeks to get an approval through.
Yep.
And I went down to CASA down at Eagle Farm, had a couple of meetings with them. We outlined the procedure. They said, this is what you've got to do. You can't launch if there's anything within 500 metres of your launch site.
Yep.
So you've got a kilometre radius from your point of launching, and we need to decide where that point is on the map. And we weren't quite sure where we were in the paddock, so they made the corner of the roads.
Yep.
Cedar Pocket and Cedar Grove Road was the centre of our field of airspace, and probably still is. That's good. Yeah.
Close to, yeah.
So we then they then taught us how to go and format a NOTAM request and submit that to Air Services, and basically set up the basic rules that we still follow today.
So roughly when was that?
2007.
Yeah, it would have been. This would have been probably August, September, because we were well and truly, we had raised a number of NOTAMs prior to that, and we had basically had a pretty solid process in mind. We were starting to develop a bit of infrastructure